I want to tell you a story that starts with the best intentions and ends with one of the most devastating public health disasters in human history. It is a story about how the same food that once saved us from starvation became the thing slowly killing us. How scientists who thought they were protecting public health got bought and sold. And how an entire generation of children got programmed to crave foods that would destroy their bodies. By the end of this story, you will understand why your grandmother lived to 95 eating butter and bacon while you struggle with your weight eating healthy, low-fat foods. This is the story of how abundance became a weapon. To understand how we got here, we need to go back about 150 years to when everything changed. For millions of years, getting enough food was humanity's biggest challenge. Then, in the span of just a few decades, we solved it completely. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how we made things, it changed how we ate. Suddenly, we could transport food across continents. We could preserve it for months. We could mass produce it in factories. Picture America in the early 1900s. For the first time in human history, regular people could walk into a store and buy foods that came from thousands of miles away. Sugar that was grown in Cuba, wheat from Kansas, meat from Chicago. But here is what nobody anticipated. When you can preserve food for long periods and ship it anywhere, you need to figure out what makes it taste good after sitting in a warehouse for months. Enter sugar. Lots and lots of sugar. Between 1890 and 1910, sugar consumption in America tripled. Not because people were eating more candy, but because manufacturers discovered that sugar made everything taste better and last longer. Canned fruits packed in syrup, processed meats with added sugars, bread that stayed soft for weeks because of sweeteners. For the first time in human history, sugar wasn't a rare treat you might taste once a year. It was hidden in everyday foods that people ate multiple times a day, and nobody thought that this might be a problem. Fast forward to the 1950s, doctors are noticing something strange. Middle-aged men, successful businessmen, the picture of prosperity, are dropping dead from heart attacks at unprecedented rates. Heart disease became the leading cause of death in America. The medical community is baffled. What changed? Why are seemingly healthy people dying in their 40s and 50s? Two brilliant scientists emerged with competing theories. First, there is Ansel Keys from the University of Minnesota. He looks at the data and sees a pattern. Countries that eat more saturated fat have higher rates of heart disease. His conclusion: fat is the killer. Then there is John Yudkin from the University of London. He's looking at the same data, but he sees something different. He notices that sugar consumption tracks almost perfectly with heart disease rates. His conclusion: sugar is the real culprit. Both scientists are brilliant, both have compelling evidence, but both can't be right. So they do what scientists do. They start researching. Keys begins his famous 7 countries study, tracking diets and disease across different populations. Meanwhile, Yudkin is conducting his own experiments. He feeds sugar to volunteers and watches what happens to their blood. What he finds is alarming. Sugar consumption rapidly increases blood triglycerides, disrupts insulin functions, and appear to directly contribute to arterial damage. For those who don't speak science, think of it like your blood is a highway. A sugar rush creates a traffic jam, a fat. The traffic cop, insulin, gets confused, and the road itself, the arteries, gets potholes. Yudkin becomes convinced that sugar is a slow-acting poison. It starts giving lectures, writing papers, warning anyone who will listen. But something strange happens. The scientific community starts turning against him. Put yourself in the shoes of a sugar industry executive in 1964. You are sitting in a mahogany-paneled boardroom, and someone slides a stack of research papers across the table. Study after study, showing that your product might be killing people. The Sugar Research Foundation, the industry's lobbying group, calls an emergency meeting. Internal memos from this time period reveals their thinking, and I quote, "Negative attitudes towards sugar are developing that could seriously impact sales," end quote. They have a choice. They could reformulate their products. They could fund legitimate research to understand the health effects. They could warn the public about potential risks. Instead, they choose the fourth option, one that would doom millions of people over the next 60 years. They decide to corrupt the science itself. John Hickson, the foundation's research director, writes a memo that reads like a battle plan, and I quote, "We should embark on a major program to encounter the negative attitudes towards sugar. We can fund research that refutes our detractors." End quote. Think about that language. Refute our detractors. Not understand the science or protect public health. Refute detractors. They start making calls. Who are the most respected nutrition scientists in America? Who has the most credibility? Whose word would be trusted without question? All roads lead to Harvard University Department of Nutrition. Dr. Frederick Stare and Dr. Mark Hagstad are nutritional royalty, Harvard professors whose research shapes government policy worldwide. When they speak, the medical community listens. The sugar industry approaches them with what seems like a straightforward proposal, and I quote, "We would like to fund a comprehensive review of the research on diet and heart disease." End quote. On the surface, this seems legitimate. Industry funding of academic research is common. The tobacco industry funds lung research, chemical companies fund environmental studies. It is just how science gets funded. But there is something different about this request. The industry doesn't just want to fund research, they want to control the conclusions. Hickson writes to the Harvard researchers, and I quote, "Our particular interest is in carbohydrates and we would like to see this emphasized in the review." End quote. Translation, make sure you focus on defending sugar. The deal is struck. The Sugar Research Foundation pays the Harvard researchers $6,500 each, equivalent to about $50,000 today. Dr. Hagstad writes back, and I quote, "We are well aware of your particular interest and will cover this as well as we can." End quote. That is academic language for "we know what you're paying us to conclude." For the next 2 years, these Harvard scientists work on their comprehensive review, but it is not really a review, it is a hit job. They systematically dismiss every study that shows sugar is harmful. They highlight every flaw, every uncertainty, every limitation. Meanwhile, studies that blame fat gets treated as gospel truth even when they have the same limitations. The fix is in before they even start writing. In 1967, the New England Journal of Medicine, the most prestigious medical journal in the world, publishes Dietary Fats, Carbohydrates, and Atherosclerotic Vascular Disease. The authors, Hagstad, McGandy, and Stare from Harvard. The conclusion, there is no doubt that the only dietary intervention required to prevent coronary heart disease is the reduction of dietary cholesterol and saturated fat. No doubt, the only intervention, sugar isn't just downplayed, it is barely mentioned as a concern. The study makes headlines worldwide. Harvard scientist, fat causes heart disease. Medical schools incorporate it into their curricula. Government officials use it to craft policy recommendations. There is just one small detail the journal doesn't mention. The study was paid for by the sugar industry. Back then, journals didn't require disclosure of funding sources. So nobody knew that this independent Harvard research was actually a bought and paid for advertisement for sugar. While Harvard was publishing the defense of sugar, the Sugar Research Foundation's own internal research was showing the exact opposite. Their private studies found that evidence is strong that sucrose is a major factor in coronary heart disease. They knew sugar was killing people, they had the proof, but instead of warning anyone, they buried their research and paid Harvard to publish the opposite conclusion. It is not just scientific fraud, it is premeditated deception with the body count in the millions. The Harvard study doesn't just influence medical opinion, it shapes government policy for the next 50 years. Dr. Mark Hagstad, one of the study's authors, gets promoted to head the nutrition division of the US Department of Agriculture. The man who was paid by the sugar industry to downplay sugar's health risk becomes the architect of America's dietary guidelines. In 1980, the US government issues its first dietary guidelines for Americans. The primary recommendation: avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. Sugar gets a gentle suggestion to avoid too much. The same warning given to salt. The food industry responds like they have won the lottery. If fat is the enemy, they will remove fat from everything and market it as healthy. But there is a problem nobody talks about publicly. When you remove fat from food, it tastes terrible. Fat carries flavor, provides texture, and creates satisfaction. Without it, food tastes like cardboard. So manufacturers face a choice: make healthy food that tastes awful or find another way to make fat-free food delicious. They choose sugar, massive amount of sugar. Suddenly, foods that never contain significant sugar are loaded with it. Fat-free yogurt gets more sugar than ice cream. Low-fat salad dressing becomes candy sauce. Heart-healthy cereals become breakfast candy. A typical fat-free muffin from this era contains sugar, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, modified cornstarch, and maltodextrin. 6 different forms of sugar, plus some flour to hold it together. The food industry has essentially replaced fat with sugar in thousands of products, marketed them as healthy foods, and people are buying them thinking they are making healthy choices. The perfect crime is complete. But the food industry isn't satisfied with just tricking people into eating more sugar. They want to make sure people can never stop. Enter Howard Moskowitz, a Harvard-trained experimental psychologist who becomes the food industry's secret weapon. Moskowitz isn't trying to make food healthier or more nutritious. His job is to make it irresistible. He develops what becomes known as the bliss point, the precise combination of sugar, salt, and fat that triggers maximum pleasure in the human brain. Here is how it works. When you eat foods that hit the bliss point, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter triggered by cocaine, alcohol, and gambling. Your brain literally experiences processed food as a drug. Moskowitz's methods are incredibly sophisticated. For a single Dr. Pepper flavor variation, he creates 61 different formulations with varying level of sweetness. He conducts 3,993 taste tests across multiple cities. He uses advanced statistical analysis to map the exact point where pleasure is maximized. Major food companies hire him to optimize their products. Campbell's Soup, General Foods, Kraft, PepsiCo. Every major processed food gets scientifically engineered to be as addictive as possible. But Moskowitz goes further. He discovered that different populations have different bliss points. Children prefer higher level of sweetness than adults. Certain ethnic groups respond more strongly to specific flavor combinations. The food industry uses this research to target specific demographics with precisely engineered products. Children's cereals get optimized for maximum sugar addiction. Products marketed to specific communities get customized bliss points. They are not just making addictive foods. They are creating personalized addiction profiles for different groups of people. The most sinister chapter in this story involves the deliberate targeting of children. The food industry discovers something disturbing. If you can program a child's taste preferences before age 10, you create a customer for life. Children who grow up eating high-sugar, highly processed foods will crave them as adults, even when they rationally know these foods are harmful. Cereal commercials don't mention nutrition or health benefits. Instead, they associate sugar consumption with fun, friendship, adventure, and prizes. The strategy is psychological warfare. Cartoon characters become sugar dealers. Prizes in cereal boxes create gambling-like reward system. Free toys condition children to associate processed foods with excitement and surprise. Children start demanding specific brands, having meltdowns in grocery store aisles when parents refuse to buy sugar-laden cereals. Parents, exhausted and wanting to avoid public scenes, give in. Marketing budgets for children's food products reach over $2 billion annually. That is more money than most countries spend on their entire healthcare system, all focused on programming children to crave foods that will damage their health. The children who were targeted by these campaigns in the 1980s and 1990s, they're the adults struggling with food addiction today. Their children are now being targeted by even more sophisticated version of the same tactics. It is a generational cycle of programmed dysfunction. By the 1990s, the consequences of this systematic deception becomes impossible to ignore. Obesity rates, which had been stable for decades, began climbing rapidly. Childhood diabetes, once so rare it was barely tracked, becomes a medical emergency. But here is the most infuriating part. The medical community continues following the corrupted advice from the 1960s. Doctors still tell patients to eat low-fat diets. Nutritionists still recommend heart-healthy cereals that contain more sugar than cookies. People are getting sicker following the official dietary advice. They're eating the foods recommended by their doctors and gaining weight. They're buying products labeled healthy and developing diabetes. The diet industry explodes into a multi-billion-dollar business. Weight loss programs, low-fat products, artificial sweeteners, fat-burning supplements, all promising solutions to problems created by following official nutritional guidance. It is a perfect system of exploitation. Corrupt science creates health problems create desperation. Desperation creates customers for solutions that don't work. Failed solutions create more desperation. The same food companies that engineer addiction also own many of the diet and weight loss companies. They profit from making people fat, then profit from their attempts to lose weight. Perpetual profit from perpetual suffering. The truth about this conspiracy stays buried for almost 50 years. Then, in 2016, a researcher named Kristen Kearns is digging through old documents in a Harvard library basement. She finds something that stops her cold. Boxes of internal documents from the Sugar Research Foundation, communications between sugar industry executives and Harvard researchers, payment records, strategy memos, the entire conspiracy laid out in black and white. Kearns publishes her finding in JAMA Internal Medicine. The story explodes across international media. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Why low-fat diets never worked, why obesity rates exploded during the healthy eating era, why people struggle with food cravings despite knowing processed food is harmful. Other researchers start digging. They discover that the sugar industry also buried its own studies showing sugar might cause cancer. They find evidence of ongoing industry funding designed to muddy the science and prevent regulations. 2015, Coca-Cola gets exposed for funding research to downplay soda's role in obesity. 2016, the candy industry gets caught funding studies claiming children who eat candy weigh less. The same tactics, the same corruption, still happening today. For 50 years, millions of people suffered and died following dietary advice that was literally written by the sugar industry. Generations of children got programmed to crave foods that would destroy their health. Entire families got trapped in cycles of food addiction and shame, all because a handful of executives decided their profits mattered more than human life. Even knowing everything I just told you, even understanding exactly how our brains are being manipulated, most of us still can't completely resist these engineered foods. Why? Because knowledge lives in one part of your brain, but addiction lives in another. Your prefrontal cortex, your rational thinking brain, can understand that these processed food is engineered to exploit your biology, but your limbic system, the ancient part of your brain that kept humans alive for millions of years, doesn't read research papers or understand corporate conspiracies. When you smell fresh bread or see pizza commercial, your survival brain activates. The food industry has weaponized millions of years of human evolution against us. They have turned our survival instincts into profit centers. They have made our biology our enemy. And then they have convinced us that our inability to resist represents a personal moral failing. This story isn't just about food. It is a blueprint that's been replicated across every industry that touches human life. The same tactics used to corrupt nutrition science are now used by pharmaceutical companies to downplay addiction risk, by social media platforms to maximize engagement, by oil companies to deny climate science. We are living in an economy that has systematically converted human vulnerabilities into shareholder value. Your biology, your psychology, your deepest needs and fears, all optimized for profit extraction. But understanding the system is the first step to escaping it. Knowing that your struggles aren't personal failures, but systematic exploitation changes everything. You are a human being trying to live in an environment that has been specifically designed to exploit every aspect of your humanity. Next time on the pages, we are going to explore how this blueprint has expanded beyond food into every system that touches your life: healthcare, fitness, supplements, mental health, all transformed into profit centers that depend on keeping you sick, insecure, and constantly consuming. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how to fight back. This is The Pages. I'm Lumi. Question everything, trust your biology, and remember, your health is not someone else's business opportunity. See you next time.